to the lecture series in animal physiology. So today we are starting the 8th week, and if you remember, in the last class of the 7th week we talked about the different form of myelination, where we talked about the Schwann cell myelination and the oligodendrocyte myelination, where the Schwann cell myelination was predominant in the peripheral nervous system, whereas oligodendrocyte myelination is predominant in the central nervous system. So in a way, if you think of a neuron coming out from the central nervous system and hitting onto the peripheral tissue, then part of the neuron which is inside the spinal cord will be myelinated by the oligodendrocytes, and part of the neuron, say for example the axon which is coming out, will be myelinated by the Schwann cells. Similarly, suppose a neuron from the periphery is sending a signal to the central nervous system. So if it is a continuous single neuron, then part of the signal from the peripheral side, or sorry, the part of the axon which is reaching up to the spinal cord will be myelinated by the Schwann cells, and part of the axon which is entering inside the spinal cord will be myelinated by the oligodendrocytes. And we discussed that possibly the reason why nature designed it in such a way because of the space minimization or optimization, because within the spinal cord you have a fairly limited space, and whatever or whatsoever you have to accommodate within that limited framework of space to execute the function. Okay. So today what we will do in a couple of classes, we will revisit some of the very early circuits what we talked about, the stretch reflex circuit and the neuromuscular junction, and in that process we will talk about the part of the excitation contraction coupling apparatus what we haven't talked yet. Okay. So if you remember, when we talked about the stretch reflex circuit, so reflex circuits are the smallest of all the circuits, neural circuits in our body. So there is a sensation on any peripheral side of our body, peripheral part of the body. That sensation along a sensory neuron travels to the spinal cord. At the spinal cord, the signal is transmitted to the lower motor neuron, which are the ventral horn neurons, directly or via an interneuron, and in that process the signal is being processed within the motor neuron and signal is relayed back to the effector. So essentially, if we look at it, the signal passes from the sensor which senses the signal, moves on to the sensory neuron. So the first level of information transfer. From sensory neuron, the message moves or the information transfer takes place to the ventral horn motor neuron. Third, ventral horn motor neuron brings back it to the effector tissue, which is the fourth level of transmission. So essentially, there are 4 information transfer. I will diagrammatically show it, that will make more sense. Or at times there may be 2 more additional transfer, or sorry, 1 more additional transfer in a way. Signal received in the ventral horn by the interneuron, and the interneuron passes the signal to the ventral horn motor neuron. So there is in between a connector, right? So these are the possible ways by which a signal can travel in a reflex circuit, and based on this connectivity, they are termed as monosynaptic reflexes and polysynaptic reflexes. So let's start. Let me draw it. That will make more sense what I am talking about. So we are into week 8. We're into lecture 1. So we are talking about the reflex circuit, and in particular the example what we will be taking about will be the simplest of all, called stretch reflex arc circuit, which is the simplest of all reflex circuits. So if this is the brain and this is the spinal cord we are talking about, so you have your motor neuron or the ventral horn neuron sitting at the center, like this. Okay. You have dorsal root neuron sitting on the dorsal horn like this. Okay. Now, possibilities of when we talk about, or so for example, a dorsal horn neuron sitting on this side. One second, I just made a small mistake. Okay. Or a dorsal horn neuron maybe just sitting somewhere just outside like this. Okay. 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 So now you have a sensor element which is sitting here. Sensor element senses some external stimulus. Here is a stimulus. So by the way, having said this stimulus can be from inside the body also, okay, can be outside also. It doesn't essentially means when I am showing it outside that it is only coming from outside environment. So within the surface, within the peripheral surface, somewhere here, somewhere inside, somewhere, you have the sensor sitting there. Sensor senses the signal, so it has a sensor element, and we will further elaborate this while we'll be talking about eyes, ears, nose, and several other sensory systems what we have, or other special senses. So this sensory input transfer the first set of electrical information. So this is the first information transfer, IT1. Okay, IT stand for information transfer. IT1. Okay. From here, the information travels all along the sensor neuron. Here, there are possibilities. So at this time, what could happen? Signal is directly transmitted to the motor neuron. So if this is the responding motor neuron, well, this one, okay. Responding, MN stands for motor neuron, right? So the responding motor neuron is directly synapsing upon. So if I had to blow up this location, it will be something like this. So you have in blue, you have the sensory neuron, this, and in closest proximity in the ventral horn sitting the motor neuron cell body with its axon like this. Here is your, or with its dendrite sitting like that. Here is the major axon. Okay. So here is the signal. Here comes the signal. Here the signal is transmitted. Here the signal is brought back. Okay. So information transfer 1. And one more thing I want to tell you, here what you are seeing. So there are sensory neurons where this process, what you are thinking as an axon, those are not axon, those are dendritic processes. And there are several sensory neurons whose dendrites are fairly long. Okay? Or for your simplicity's sake, you can even have this dendrite, the one which is drawn so long. You can have this dendrite, or this process, you can really shift this neuron out here, cell body, so that you don't get confused. You can keep it slightly in a close proximity to the ventral horn, right? So the signal moves like this, comes here, synapse here, so which is your information transfer 2 out here, what you see. And then this processor brings back the process signal through its axon to its target tissue out here. Okay. So the involvement out here is between two major neurons directly, and that is out here. This is the only involvement what is happening. Okay. Now there is a possibility that the involvement out here could be executed by another neuron which is sitting in between, like this. And that additional neuron, so one end of this additional neuron is synapsing with the motor neuron, the other end is synapsing with the axon of the sensory neuron, like this. So the flow of information is like this. Okay. So if it is interfaced by another neuron, which is an interneuron, this connectivity is termed as polysynaptic reflex. Whereas in the second case, or in the first case, where it is in direct contact, this is called monosynaptic reflex. Okay. These are the two possibilities, polysynaptic reflex and monosynaptic, and you can further make it complex that you may have two interneuron processing. There are several possibilities which may emerge out of this situation. So these are some of the very simplistic reflex circuits what we have. Now the time taken is exceptionally small in such circuits. The reason for reflex circuits to take so less time is the fact that these circuits are your survival strategies. You really do not have any room for the higher centers at this part of the brain to think over such things, because you have to act very fast. So now in the light of this, we will talk about the next representative circuit, which I was mentioning as the stretch reflex arc circuit. Okay. So before I draw this circuit, the basic architecture of the circuit is same as I have already shown you, but what this circuit exactly does. So say for example, hypothetically think of a situation. This is our muscle out here. It gets a hit. It gets a hit, or it gets a hit at joints or somewhere. So the muscle length changes, or muscle gets distorted. So essentially what you see is the muscle get distorted. Okay, so there is a change in the length of the muscle, but you don't even realize that much before you realize upon it, the muscle regains its original length. So what essentially happened, what you see is that the muscle got a hit, it stretches, and even before any of your realization, muscle gets back to its original position. So in terms of a physical process, the muscle length changes and it, or stretched out, and it came back to its original position, as if there is a reflex action which is happening. Now what is the title, what I was telling you, what I was writing? If you see the title, what I said, stretch means there is some form of a stretch which is happening, and that stretch leading to a reflex, and this is in the form of a circuit, a stretch reflex arc circuit. This is what the circuit is all about. So in order for a stretch reflex arc circuit to happen, if we logically break down the problem, then we need a muscle length sensor, something which changes the change in length in muscle. And such sensors, which has the ability to sense the change in length of a muscle, are called muscle spindle. The term which is used is the sensor within muscle which can monitor the change in length of muscle is called muscle spindle. Okay. Step 1, you have a muscle spindle. Now this muscle spindle, what is the real structure? This muscle spindle has to be innervated by a sensory neuron. Now whenever we hit upon a muscle, this muscle not only changes its length, the spindle too changes its length. So if you see a muscle like this, so it will be like this. Here is the muscle. Remember we talked about all these myotubes, myofibrils and all those things. So you have the muscle with multinucleated myotubes, myofibers and everything which is present there. Okay. Within these muscles, so in this case we are talking about the skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, and within the skeletal muscle we have these structure called muscle spindles. And these muscle spindles are innervated by the dendrite of the sensory neurons, something like this. Okay. So once a muscle take an impact, this is the impact what muscle is taking. This impact changes two different lengths. The first length change of muscle and length change of sensor or muscle spindle. Okay. So try to kind of imagine the situation. Muscle, in this case, the whole muscle is your effector, where the effect is happening. So there is a change in it, which is, and on the muscle there are muscle sensors. So here I will take a pause, because I'll have to take you back to one of the earlier classes when we talked about how this muscle spindle is formed, and then from there we will follow up how this whole circuit kind of works. So I will close in here. The very next class we will start from here, that how this change in muscles integrate it into the complete circuit. Okay, thank you.